for the audio, or you can even watch back. Giving players all the props, or put them on blast. We don't give no hot takes, only talk facts.
We're giving all our devotion, riding high on this wave of emotion. Going all out, yeah, cause this is our time. No, ain't no stopping us till we reach the finish line. All in, we came here to win. We're gonna give everything. S-I-C-K on the run. S-I-C-K, sick, sick. On fire, we're ready to fight. We'll bring the house down tonight. S-I-C-K on the run. S-I-C-K, sick, sick.
Playing on the car ride, play it when you lounge. X and O, you know that we can hold it down. Shout out to my man Sammy, got it off the ground. And to all the listeners tuned in right now, got debates, analysis, and speculation. This is sports talk for the new generation. You know where to find us, got a reputation. Sick podcast, your #1 sports destination.
We're giving all our devotion, riding high on this wave of emotion. Going all out, yeah, cause this is our time. No, ain't no stopping us till we reach the finish line. All in, we came here to win. We're gonna give everything. S-I-C-K on the run. S-I-C-K, sick, sick. On fire, we're ready to fight. We'll bring the house down tonight. S-I-C-K on the run. S-I-C-K, sick, sick.
S-I-C-K, it's the sickest podcast. Tune in for the audio, or you can even watch back. Giving players all the props, or put them on blast. We don't give no hot takes, only talk back. S-I-C-K,
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 S-I-C-K.
all in, we came here to win. We're gonna give everything. S-I-C-K on the run. S-I-C-K, sick, sick.
S-I-C-K, it's the sickest podcast. Tune in for the audio, or you can even watch back. Giving players all the props, or put them on blast. We don't give no hot takes, only talk facts.
We're giving all our devotion, riding high on this wave of emotion. Going all out, yeah, cause this is our time. No, ain't no stopping us till we reach the finish line. All in, we came here to win. We're gonna give everything. S-I-C-K on the run. S-I-C-K, sick, sick. On fire, we're ready to fight. We'll bring the house down tonight. S-I-C-K on the run. S-I-C-K, sick, sick.
Playing on the car ride, play it when you lounge. X and O, you know that we can hold it down. Shout out to my man Sammy, got it off the ground. And to all the listeners tuned in right now, got debates, analysis, and speculation. This is sports talk for the new generation. You know where to find us, got a reputation. Sick podcast, your #1 sports destination.
Giving all our devotion, riding high on this wave of emotion. Going all out, yeah, cause this is our time. No, ain't no stopping us till we reach the finish line. All in, we came here to win. We're gonna give everything. S-I-C-K on the run. S-I-C-K, sick, sick. On fire, we're ready to fight. We'll bring the house down tonight. S-I-C-K on the run. S-I-C-K, sick, sick.
S-I-C-K, it's the sickest podcast. Tune in for the audio, or you can even watch back. Giving players all the props, or put them on blast. We don't give no hot takes, only talk back. S-I-C-K,
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 S-I-C-K.
S-I-C-K.
Turn up your volume. Because you're about to listen to The Sick Podcast. With Tony Marinaro.
55 seconds left in the penalty, a minute and 27 seconds left in regulation time. Boston 4, Montreal 3. Lafleur coming out rather gingerly on the right side. He gives it into Lemaire, back to Lafleur. Oh!
The sickest Montreal Canadiens podcast.
You're in the ball!
Sports entertainment like no other.
Rejoint, on lui fait perdre la rondelle, une passe devant. Et c'est le dégagement et ce sera la victoire des Canadiens. Coupe Stanley pour les Canadiens. Le 23e de l'histoire.
You found the dogs! John, you found the dogs! He found the dogs!
And all together, they worked a young team to the top. And now, a 24th Stanley Cup banner will hang from the rafters of the famous Forum in Montreal. The Canadiens win the Stanley Cup.
Brought to you by Energy Transportation Group. Driven to be different. La Vida Tibi. Embrace your true nature. And Locage. If the last time you went to Locage was when the Habs won the Cup, it's time you went back to Locage. It's gonna be sick.
Marinaro, Monday night. Good to be with you on this 20 of February. It is 1 minute past 10 p.m. Eastern Time. And, of course, the Sick Podcast brought to you in part by Bittt at Tibi. This one here is the 5.2% alcohol. So we showed you the 5% last week. This one here is the 5.2. Brewed in Quebec, a winner of a dozen international awards, Bittt at Tibi offers quality microbrewery beers made with premium ingredients for everyone's taste. Bittt at Tibi, embrace your true nature. Also brought to you in part by Locage. If the last time you went to Locage was when the Habs won the Cup, it's time you go back to Locage. The menu will surprise you. Speaking of which, I'd like to give a shout out to Kevin Baudry, who I believe is the assistant manager over at Locage Centre Bell. I was there on Friday before WWE SmackDown, and I was there on Saturday night before Elimination Chamber. So 2 nights in a row at Locage. No complaints. The wings as an entree, the pigs in a blanket, even the chicken tenders, which, by the way, is more of a main meal, but a hungry guy like myself, I have it as an entree. No comment, please. With a sauce, which tastes so good, but in the end, it's so easily made, but I could make it at home, and it wouldn't come out that way, but they make it there. It is basically 50% honey, 50% mustard. You mix it up. You dip the chicken tenders in there. Wow. Unbelievable. And brought to you in part by, speaking of unbelievable, Energy Transportation Group, a leading full-service logistics provider serving all of North America, driven to be different. Love that company, and I love my boys, Mike Chiquino and Sean Gerard, because they do it with passion and energy. That's why. Speaking of energy, one guy who always brings it when he joins me, I haven't talked to Stu Cowan from the Montreal Gazette and Habs Inside Out in quite some time, and he was on a couple of days ago with my buddy Matt O'Hayan on Friday night, but I wanted to have a chance to talk to him, so I gave him a call. I said, Stu, can you join me tonight? And he said yes. Now, just keep in mind that Eric Engels is usually a regular contributor on Monday nights, and Eric couldn't make it tonight, but we're going to see if we can slot him in here sometime this week. And I look forward to it. I look forward to talking to Stu. Stu, what's going on?
You're making me hungry, Tony.
Really, eh? I'm hearing a little bit of static. Is it on my end or is it on your end?
I'm not sure. You sound fine to me.
Okay. I'm hearing a little bit of static. If we can just hear from Agnello and Sammy, and it looks like they're going to bring Stu back. So I guess it's not on my end. I guess it's on Stu's end. All right. Okay. Good evening to everyone who's watching. We're going to figure it out. Good evening to everyone who's watching on YouTube Live, on Facebook Live, and on Twitter Live. And if you're watching on Facebook Live and on Twitter Live, and you're not watching on YouTube Live, if you can subscribe to our channel, it's absolutely free. And watch on YouTube Live. Hey, we're not going to spit at anyone watching on Twitter Live or Facebook Live, but we'd appreciate it if you watch on YouTube Live. Why? Because we want to grow our YouTube channel as much as we can, obviously. And so that's why. And YouTube pays us. It's a beautiful thing. Tony, your shirt is sick. Thank you very much. Thank you. Sportbuffshop.com. That's where you can find the sick attire, and you can order it there. Robert says, yay, more free food. I don't know what that means, Robert, because I don't get free food. They pay for their advertising, and I pay for my food. It's a beautiful thing. So I go support those who support the Sick Podcast. That's the way it works. If you wanted to know, just ask. I'll give you the information. And if it was free, well, then it's because I deserve it. It's a beautiful thing. Great column by Eric, by the way. This coming in from Big Bill. Yes, Eric did have a great column today on Sportsnet and sportsnet.ca. Basically, what he did was he spoke with Jeff Gordon, Executive Vice President of Hockey Ops with the Montreal Canadiens about a year ago. And at that time, Gordon told Eric that he wanted to bring the Canadiens basically from analog to digital, and he wanted to remodernize the whole organization. It was a big task. So Eric revisited 1 year later to see what was done following that article. Quite a bit was done. I'm not going to get into it all that much because I figure since Eric wrote it, I might as well have Eric talk about it on the program. Stu is back. Stu, what's going on?
I hope I'm sounding better now. Does that work?
Yeah, you are sounding a lot better now. You're sounding a lot better. You even look better now than you did before, Stu.
Fix my hair for you. That's why.
Hey, before we get into it, I, like everyone else, had a chance to see Mitch Garber on social media talk about wanting to keep the Montreal Gazette alive. We know it was announced some time ago, post media, that there were going to be job cuts. And, Mitch Garber stepped up and said, hey, I don't want to be the guy who just sat back and watched this happen. Our city, Montreal, losing our local daily English newspaper. And he wants to try and find a way. And he's sure that he can get some of his friends involved and some of his business friends involved, find a way to keep the Gazette around and to make it somewhat profitable. I know you had a chance to speak to him as well. Are there any updates, Stu? Is there anything you could tell us, or did I just miss the latest update?
No, I haven't spoken with Mitch since all this started. I did do a column and a Q&A story on him a couple of years ago when he became a minority owner of the Seattle Kraken. I know Mitch. I know him fairly well. I wouldn't call him a close friend, but we are friends. These are trying times for the newspaper business everywhere, including Post Media and including the Gazette. And it's nice to know that an influential businessman in Montreal with a lot of money like Mitch is interested in the future of the Gazette and saving the future of the Gazette if it comes to that point. So these are tough times right now, as I said, for the business. It's tough times for people at the Gazette. I mean, the news is out there. There's going to be layoffs coming up very shortly. We don't know who's going to be gone as of yet. We know it's out there now. Pat Hickey has voluntarily announced that he's going to take a voluntary layoff to save a younger person's job, which anybody who knows Pat won't be surprised. He's got a heart of gold. So it's trying times. We're going to see what happens moving forward, but it's definitely nice news to know that somebody like Mitch, who is a great guy. I mean, he's a mensch. He's when I did the interview with him, I knew Mitch, probably as you did also, Tony, before he became very wealthy through hard work and through the businesses he's had. And at the end of the interview, I said, Mitch, you're the same guy now that I remember before you had all this financial success. And he really is. He hasn't, he's a smart, hardworking, humble guy who has never forgotten where he came from. And Montreal he's a proud Montrealer. As he's told me, he could live anywhere in the world he wants. He chooses to live here. And it's nice to know that someone like Mitch has interest and a concern for the future of the Montreal Gazette.
It's funny you say that. I had this conversation with my cousin a couple of days ago, and we were talking about the lottery. And I don't know if you've heard my lottery story by now, Stu, but I think I've told everyone. Have you heard my lottery story by now?
I don't think so.
All right. Give or take, I don't know if it was 5 or 6 years ago, right? Time flies when you're having fun. My wife, and by the way, Eric Engels just sent me a note. So he had a previous engagement, but he sent me a note. It looks like he's going to make his way back, and he's probably going to join us in the next 15 minutes or so, okay? So I'm looking forward to that. So we're going to have a nice three-way roundtable with Eric and Stu and myself. I don't know when it was, Stu, 5 or 6 years ago. My wife goes to the car wash. She washes the truck, and she goes over to the cash to pay for the car wash, and she plays an $8 ticket, Lotto Max. And number one comes out. Second number comes out. Third number comes out. Fourth number comes out. Fifth number comes out. Sixth number comes out. Now there's 7 numbers. And the jackpot is $60 million. I repeat, $60 million.
And you've got the first 6 numbers right.
The first 6 numbers are right. And the 7th number comes out, and we have number 16. And number 9 comes out. And every time I hear somebody talk about Henri Richard and Maurice Richard, I always think of my lotto ticket. We had Henry, and Maurice came out.
Wow.
No one won. No one. Not one person won the $60 million jackpot. One person, I believe, won the with the bonus, which was number 21, was $494,000. And 111 people, including my wife, went 6 for 7. 111 people. And it paid $5,712. My wife is still the happiest person in the world, and I am still in the biggest depression ever known to man. We're going to do it $5,712. It didn't even pay for our credit card bill that month.
Well, you were one number away, Tony. You could have bought the Gazette.
You know what? I would have loved to. I would have loved to, Stu. I said this, and I wasn't planning on going here, by the way. But let's entertain this conversation. I said this on French radio a couple of days ago, and I, you know what? I'm not scared to say it. Okay. And you know what? I'm probably going to tick off a couple of people along the way. I don't care. I really don't care. There's too much Montreal Canadiens talk in the media. On English radio, on French radio, in print, daily newspapers, websites, television, the sports media out of Quebec in general, in my opinion, there's way too much Montreal Canadiens talk. I understand that Montreal is a Montreal Canadian city. It's a Canadian city first, it's a Canadian city second, and it's a Canadian city third. I understand all of that. I also understand that the Canadiens help pay a lot of the bills. I understand that as well. But at the same time, to talk about Pierre-Luc Dubois for the last 3 months, who's still going to be under contract with his team until the end of June, and likely is going to sign a 1-year deal with them as RFA with Winnipeg, and is still going to be a Winnipeg Jet for another year after that, to talk about him for a month and a half, like, what are we doing here? You can't talk about him in 6 months or in a year from now. To talk about the Canadiens' power play every day, to talk about whether you're going to trade Drouin or Dadonov or Monahan every day, not for the last week, not for the last 2, not for the last month, but for the last 2 months, maybe even the last 3 months. And I find what happens is, because everyone's talking about the same stuff over and over and over again, people lose some interest. And that's why there's going to be maybe less papers sold. Maybe there's going to be less watches on television. Maybe there's going to be less views on podcasts. And there's going to be different sectors of the media, sports media in Quebec, that are going to be in trouble.
Well, I think we had this discussion once before, Tony, but I think what would have less people watching sports channels or listening to podcasts or radio or reading the paper would be having less Canadian stuff, because that's what people in this town care about. That's what people want to talk about. That's what people are interested in.
Because we got them used to that, Stu.
Well, I mean, no, we can track, I mean, at the Gazette and any other website, we can track who's reading what, how much time they're spending on stories. And trust me, at the Montreal Gazette, there's more interest in the Montreal Canadiens than just about anything else in this city. And I'm not just including sports, I'm including news and business and everything else. It's a city. I mean, I've said the city is a Canadian city. People love the Canadiens. They love them 24/7. They love them whether they're winning. They love them whether they're losing. It's just the way the city is. It's the same like in Green Bay with the Packers or other places where there's one sports team that dominates. And in Montreal, the Canadiens dominate.
Says Bish Boy Steve, Tony, you hate the Habs, which is a really stupid comment, Bish Boy Steve, because I've been working in the media for over 20 years, and it's thanks to the Montreal Canadiens and the talk that it generates and the money it generates, and the fact that I had a job was probably because of them. So, that's a stupid comment. Now, to someone who says, But Tony, you don't have that much non-Canadians content. No, that was by design, because when we started off with the podcast, we wanted to build a community, and the community we wanted to build was a Montreal Canadiens community. We are now.
But Tony, interrupted. That's the same with all Montreal media. I mean, Montreal media you got to cover what people are interested in, right? And people in this city are interested in the Canadiens, rightly or wrongly. That's just the way it is. I think I told you this story before. When I was a kid, my sister had no interest in hockey. My sister's 5 years older than me. My parents would go out on a Saturday night. I could watch the first period of the hockey game, and she could watch the rest, and she would suffer through one period of hockey. Now my sister doesn't miss a game. She watches all the games. She watches all the post-game shows. It's just the way. It's a 24/7 show. As I've written columns at this before. The Canadiens have become reality TV. It's become a reality TV show in Montreal. It's 24/7. It's all people talk about. I get together with my buddies, over a beer or whatever. It doesn't matter if it's winter or summer. They're talking about the Canadiens. And I'm sure a lot of your viewers out there, it's the same type of thing. It's just there's just so much interest in this team in this city, and that's the way it is. I mean, it's not like Toronto, where they have the Raptors and the Blue Jays, and they got all the major sports in that city. In Montreal, we have the Canadiens, and then we have the Alouettes and the Impact, which are minor pro sports leagues.
All right, I want to talk about that for a second, because and by the way, we wanted to dominate with, we wanted to be, very relevant with Habs talk. Yes, on the podcast. We also had a plan. And so we started going full time 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. I think we started up pretty much in September. And the plan was for next September, or maybe before, to introduce another podcast, or maybe 2 other podcasts. So stay tuned, because there's news on that coming up. Maybe even sooner than you think. But Stu, granted everything you're saying, no problem. Everyone knows the Canadiens are king. And when the Canadian season comes to an end on April 15, and we're going to talk about the Canadiens for the rest of April, and we're going to talk about them for the rest of May, and then we're going to talk about them for the rest of June. Mm-hmm. And luckily, the draft is going to come up anywhere between usually the 3rd week of June, and then luckily free agency pops up the 1st of July. But then after that, from mid-July, when they're not signing no unrestricted free agents, and all of August, we talk about what? And then if you try to switch to talk about other topics, the problem is that the public is not going to be interested, because you've never pumped up any of those other sports, or you understand what I'm saying?
Well, I think you're giving too much credit to promoting. I don't think the reason that there's so much interest in the Canadiens, a lot of it has to do with every single game's on TV now. When I was a kid, you had Saturday night, hockey night in Canada, and you might have one other game during the week, maybe on a Wednesday night. A lot of the games weren't on TV. You never saw them. There was no 24/7 radio shows. There was no podcasts like yours. There was no Hockey Inside Out website. And as I said, as time has evolved and every game's on TV, Canadiens players can't walk down the how many cities in North America would the equipment manager for a pro sports team write a book that everybody's talking about? That just shows you, this city. I mean, the equipment manager of the Canadiens writes a book, and it's all everybody's talking about for a couple of weeks. And it's
I know, but hold on a second.
It's the way it is in the city.
Perfect. That's the way it is. But members of the media talked about that book for weeks.
Mm-hmm. And people read it.
You could have talked about that book for 2 days, and it would have been over.
Well, and people read. The thing is, I mean, as I said, I don't know. I think we had written only one story on it, but the TV networks, so that they see what the numbers are, what the ratings are, how many people are reading stuff, and if tons of people are reading about that book and interested in that book, well, then you're going to do another story on it. Or you're going to do another video on it. So it's what we cover is driven more by what people are interested than the other way around.
Perfect. So a lot of people say that Montreal is an event city, right?
It is. I mean, the Grand Prix. I mean, here's an example. The Grand Prix comes every summer. I've covered it the last 5 or 6 years, and before that, when I was sports editor, I was involved in the planning of coverage for it and everything like that.
Yeah.
People come to Montreal. The city's Grand Prix, Grand Prix, Grand Prix. I bet you if you went to the circuit and you stood outside and you asked people coming into the track, can you name me 5 F1 drivers off the top of your head? I bet you more than half of the people there couldn't. They go there because it's an event. It's something to be seen. The tennis is an event. The NBA exhibition game that comes to Montreal is an event.
Perfect.
The Blue Jays, The Blue Jays exhibition game, which they don't have anymore, was an event when it was here.
So let me ask you something. How often do Montreal media talk about the Blue Jays? How often do they talk about tennis? How often do they talk about?
Well, when the tennis
they
is here,
don't. Hold on a second. Yeah, when they come, they talk about it 2 weeks leading up to the event. So the WWE just came. It was a huge success in Montreal. Everyone interviewed the wrestlers 2 weeks before and a week before. They built it up. But this way, you only have to do a little bit of prep work and prep for those 2 weeks of maybe talking to 2 or 3 wrestlers, and it's over and you don't have to talk about it again.
But like I said, Tony,
with all due respect, I think there's a lot of lazy journalism.
No, the tennis in the F1, people are interested in F1 the week it comes here. The majority of people, there are over 100,000 people at the racetrack. Like I said, I bet you half of them couldn't name you 5 F1 drivers. And the tennis events, it's an event also that comes here. It's 1 week every summer. Weather's nice outside. It's nice to be outside. They have a nice facility up there at Jerry Park for the tennis. It's fun to go to. And then it moves on, and then the Canadiens take the center stage again.
So
I used to joke when the Expos were here. I sort of joked. When the Expos were here at the end and they were drawing like 5,000 fans a game, I used to say if the Canadiens played a softball game with the Big O, they would get more fans than the Expos. I was half joking because I think it would be true.
What happens when the Canadiens are terrible for 3 years in a row? What happens when the Canadiens are terrible for 3 years in a row?
No, if you don't talk about
the other sport, well, people are going to, you're going to have to rely on a losing organization to give you enough material day in, day out. And I think our business is in trouble because of this.
I disagree. I think the Canadiens are keeping our business going in this city.
Oh, man.
And okay, I'll throw a question back to you. If we're not focusing on the Canadiens, what would you focus on instead?
You can't focus on much right now because people aren't used to it. But do you know that?
No, if you were starting.
Okay, but do you know that?
What would you be focusing on now?
Last week,
along with the Canadiens.
Okay, last week it was announced that Matko Miljevic, who's supposed to be the heir apparent to Jordy Mihailovic, or is supposed to be the guy that's going to play his role. Okay, number 10, the most important role. And I had this conversation with my buddy Jeremy Filosa earlier today. And we're both on the same page. The most important role on a soccer team is the role of the number 10 or the number 9, the goal scorer, okay? But the number 10 is the architect of the whole offense, all right? The guy who's supposed to step up with Mihailovic being sold to a team out of the Netherlands, all right, got hurt in a preseason game. He's out for 3 months, all right? And you know who talked about it? Nobody. No one. Zilch. Nada.
I need to look on I think we had something probably on the Gazette website, and I guarantee you it was not read by very many people. There's just not interest. The interest isn't there.
So
and most.
So what's the future? What's the future of sports teams in the city then?
I bet you the majority, like I was saying before, the majority of sports fans might not know be able to name 5 F1 drivers at the Grand Prix. I think even less percentage of Montrealers would know who these soccer guys are.
Once again, so I'm going to tell you this: when I was working sports radio, what I said to the team was, bring me these players, get them in studio, and I want to help try to introduce them to the public, right? You know, where they were born, at what age they started playing soccer, where they grew up, when they fell in love with the game, who they looked up to, what their pathway was, and stuff like that. And I believe a lot of that work hasn't been done. And then it's hard to talk about players like this because a lot of teams, you're right.
Well, the impact of their FC Montreal, whatever, they're their own worst enemy when it comes to stuff like that also. I mean, you're talking about in the summer trying to do different stuff. I think I might have spoken with you before about this on one of your podcasts. When during the summer, before COVID, I was doing a My Montreal feature, which was taking athletes and just asking what they like most about Montreal. I did one with Georges Larac. I did a few. I did one with Evan Bush, the Impact goalkeeper at the time. Lived in Montreal year round, out in the West Island. Met him at a coffee shop in the West Island with his wife and kids. Wrote a nice story about it. Videos, the whole works. I asked the Impact after that to get a couple other want to do the coach, want to do somebody else, and that's not possible. So you know what I mean. So for them specifically, they don't do themselves any favors when it comes to drawing attention to their own team, because you go to an impact practice, they bring out two guys, they stand there, every single person talks to the same two guys, gets the same quotes, the same thing. And, the coach doesn't speak the day of a game or the day before a game, I don't believe. Marty St. Louis speaks twice a day. So it's just, and for that specific team, they're their own worst enemy when it comes to.
There's no doubt.
They put it this way: they need media exposure more than the media needs them, to put it bluntly. And I don't think they realize that. So you go out. I did the nice thing on Evan Bush, was a good story. It's still online if people want to search for it. And then you try and do another one, and you get roadblocked. So you say, you know what? We'll move on and do something else.
Listen, I don't know if I don't know if I agree with that, Stu, that they need the media exposure more than the media needs them. Let me explain. I totally get your point that if you put up articles regarding CF Montreal, you say you don't get the views.
No.
Look, I've seen my buddy Jeremy Filosa break a lot of CF Montreal stories. Mm-hmm. And let me tell you, he gets more views and more retweets than a lot of people get talking about the same story with the Canadiens too. Like, that also works. But, CF Montreal, they have very deep pockets. I know you know that.
Yep.
So if they don't get the media exposure, I mean, they're going to be around because the owners are in it for the love of the game and to do it for the city. But if we're not going to talk about them, once again, Stu,
the thing you got to realize too, Tony, you got to realize too how the media landscape has changed. When I was first sports editor of the Gazette, I think we had at least 8 reporters. We had about a 12-page sports section.
Wow.
We had 4 guys who were just desk sports editors. So back then, if you go back then, Randy Phillips covered university sports. Randy covered soccer. We called all kinds of different stuff. The sports department now, and Pat Lees, are going to be 2 people, myself and Herb Zurkowski. The sports section is smaller. We have smaller staff, smaller space, and it's the same everywhere. I mean, I see Tibi laid off 140 people recently.
Mm-hmm.
So as the sports departments get smaller and space gets and newspapers gets more limited, one of the former editors-in-chief of the Gazette, when stuff started to shrink in the newspaper business, he had a great line. He said, the Gazette can't be everything to everyone anymore. We have to focus on what people are interested in, what people want to read. And from a sports perspective, that's the Canadiens. And we have all kinds of analytical data now on the website on who reads what, who doesn't read what. As I mentioned, how much time they spend on a story, what kind of interest it generates. And we could write 10 impact stories a week, Tony, and I don't think it would change.
But once again, I really worry about sports in this city. Then if you're saying that, you know what, we write the articles on the other team, like on CF Montreal, nobody cares. We write the article on the Montreal Alouettes, nobody cares. And then what? We're going to lose our soccer team. We're going to lose our CFL team. We're only going to have a hockey team in the city. There's a sports radio station in the city that doesn't send a reporter to Montreal Alouettes practices or CF Montreal practices anymore. Do you understand?
Well, it's not.
There's very few.
There's very few that send people out to those practices now. I mean, that's just the reality of the business, the way it is now. I mean, the Gazette, we still cover the Alouettes. Herb's the best CFL reporter in the country, as far as I'm concerned. We cover the Alouettes. We do the Impact, cover the games and whatnot. But there's people don't want to read Impact stories 7 days a week, Tony. They don't. I mean, they'll cover the game story or do whatever. It's just, I mean, as I said, Montreal's not the only city in North America like this. There's other cities where one team just dominates, or even North America, as I mentioned Green Bay before. In Green Bay, nobody cares about anything about the Packers. That's the team. In Montreal, it's the Canadiens, and that's, as I said, the Canadiens. If the Canadiens had put a softball team at the Big O for a charity game when the Expos were in their last season here, I think they would have got more people than the Expos were getting.
I hear you, but we're talking about Montreal that does have a team in the CFL. They do have a team in the MLS, and I know that the MLS is not the biggest league in the world, but the MLS in many cities in the United States of America is bigger than the National Hockey League.
Well, yeah, because hockey's not the number one sport there. That'd be like, of course not. I mean, that's not the case.
The MLS is a much younger league than the National Hockey League is.
What American cities are you talking about, though? You're not talking about New York, where the Yankees or I don't know what city you're talking about with MLS would have an MLS team and a hockey team where there's more interest in the soccer team. But maybe a place like Columbus, Maybe a place like I'm trying to think of someone else off the top of my head, but that's the one city I could think. I know Columbus built the new soccer stadium there. It's I think it seats about 25,000.
Let's bring in Eric Engels, and we'll add him onto this discussion. Eric, how are you?
I'm great. I'm in, as you can see, a very small hotel room here in New York.
All right.
But I would rather be here than Newark, which I'll go to tomorrow, where the Canadiens play the Devils. And I had the pleasure of listening to you guys the last little while, and Stu and I have often discussed this, especially as it pertains to potentially bringing a baseball team back to Montreal, or whatever it is that
it won't work.
As Stu has said himself many times, actually, I quote him on this, it's not even a hockey town, it's a Montreal Canadiens town. Like, it's, people were aghast when they didn't sell out the World Juniors that were recently at the Bell Center in Montreal, and tickets were priced too high because they assumed that it's a hockey town here. But the hockey town is in Blainville, and it's in the deep pockets of Quebec. It's not here in Montreal.
Eric,
it's a Montreal Canadiens town.
How many junior hockey teams have failed in Montreal? I mean, the Montreal Juniors, the Montreal Rocket. I mean, the Laval Rocket now with the arena in Laval and easy metro access and the fact that it's Canadiens prospects playing there. But it's, again, that's affiliated with the Canadiens. That's sort of like Canadiens hockey. It's still
it's Laval. It's Laval. It's not Montreal.
But Eric, hear me out, okay? When we talk about too much Canadiens talk, listen to this. I love reading Stu writing an article about Michael Matheson growing up on the West Island of Montreal, and Stu writing about the fact, Michael's dad, obviously, born here, living here, watching the Canadiens as a youngster, dreaming of his kid to play for the Montreal Canadiens. Boom, it's happened. And he is like, the number one defenseman on this team. Beautiful story. I love reading your story, following up on your story of a year ago with Jeff Gordon, and 1 year later, and what happened, and Adam Nicholas, and the Canadiens hired him full-time, and they added him to the practices, and he's followed up on the development, and this is what he told Joshua Roy. I read both articles, okay? It's new to me. I love that. But talk of Jonathan Drouin, Sean Monahan, and Evgeny Dadonov getting traded every day for the last 3 months, I don't like that. That's I don't like that. I'm not that hurts our business.
But Tony, who's writing that every day for 3 months? Because I know with myself, we're trying to find different stories that other people don't have, because there is so much coverage of the Canadiens.
And that's what I love, Stu. I love finding stories that other people don't have. My rant is on, talking about a player who belongs to the Winnipeg Jets. This chat started 2 months ago.
Guilty.
He's gonna be under contract with them for till July, and then he's gonna sign another 1 year deal if he's not traded. You would think he'll sign another year deal. He'll probably be a Winnipeg Jet for at least a year, maybe a year and a half. And Eric, you're probably guilty about talking about it once, twice.
Yeah.
This talk went on for months.
Okay, but you know what?
For another team.
So you know what?
But Eric, I'm sure the reader, and I was telling Tony, I don't know if you heard this before we got on, just about how analytics and on the websites we can tell who read what, how much time they spent on it. I bet you those stories were incredibly well read.
Yeah, for sure. Anything to do with Pierre-Luc Dubois is going to be well read. Anything to do that's unique. It may be an exhausted topic, to your point, Tony, but there are different ways of discussing it, and that was the only reason I went there a month ago. But just to give you a bit of insight, because Stu and I are we compete with each other, but at the end of the day we have similar audiences, so it's not like I'm sitting there tearing my hair out when Stu writes something or that's similar to what I have or whatever it is. At the end of the day, the Canadiens are filled. We were talking about this recently. Like, the Canadiens are filled with interesting guys who we like to talk to, and honestly, Stu does a lot more of the grunt work on the feature stuff than I do. It gets exhausting kind of sharing an opinion on a daily basis on games that the results have no bearing whatsoever. Stu's in the room every day with a notepad asking like a billion questions to get something unique to tell about these players. He's probably the hardest working guy on the entire beat. And you just, at the same time, there's a really funny dynamic that's going on right now with the Canadiens, in that when you walk in their room, they have out of 20 guys on the team, or 18 or whatever, however many, 20 guys, whatever, like 18 of them are a complete pleasure to talk to. They are fantastic. Honestly, I can't isolate one and be like, wow, I hate speaking to this guy. There are some that are a bit quieter than the others. But the problem is that there's not much to dig into in terms of a really interesting storyline with the guys who are there right now. They have half an NHL team dressed on a nightly basis. And like I said, the games, the results, they don't matter at all. So it becomes pretty tough when you get to this stage of the season. And I'm not making excuses for us. I think we all try to branch out. I read Stu's article today on Mike Matheson with his dad and all that stuff. It was fantastic. And I was, the article that I released today was something that I had to work on for months to be able to share that. I'm so happy it's off my plate right now. But honestly, like, it'll be a struggle from here to the end of the season to come up with anything remotely as interesting.
All right. And we're going to get to that article in just
But just to interrupt you for a second there, Tony, when you're talking about, we're trying to find different story angles and different things when you go to a Canadiens practice. As I mentioned to you before, when you go to an FC Montreal practice, two guys come out or whatever, everybody there, whoever's there, gets the same guy saying the same thing. The coach isn't available the day before a game. So if the coach isn't available the day before the game, why would you go out?
That is a big problem. Instead of making two players available that most members of the media probably wouldn't want to talk to, you have to make every player available. They're not in a position to only give two players available. I will agree with you on that.
And the coach not available not only the day before. The coach Marty St. Louis is available the day before the game, the morning of the game, after the game. Marty St. Louis
was offered a day off when the Canadiens were struggling at their worst and refused to take it. I mean,
his line too, Eric, you were both in that one, was he says, I speak with you guys when things are going well. I'm not going to hide from you guys when things are going bad. And we all agreed that he could have the day off, because it's got to be a grind speaking, every single day, twice on game days. Give him a day off. He's like, no, I'm going to talk to you guys anyway. All
right. Quick question. I want you to think about this one before you answer, because it's an interesting question. So you take a look at the Canadiens and what they're doing this year. Not that anyone expected them to make the playoffs, but if I would ask you, do they have a leadership problem? Yes or no? Stu, you'd say what?
I'd say no. I don't.
Eric?
I think there's so many. There's just so many guys that have been hurt. I mean, Nick Suzuki's a young captain, and they knew that when they gave him the C, which is why Gallagher and Edmondson remain assistant captains. They've both been hurt. They've been gone. Sean Monahan's been gone. So they knew they were giving a young captain the C, and they surrounded him with veterans, but those veterans haven't been around. I'm not saying Nick Suzuki hasn't been a good leader, but it's been more difficult for him in his first year of a captaincy to not have these veteran guys around to help him out a bit. But Nick Suzuki's respected by everybody in the room. He's a quiet leader. He's not the guy who gets up and speaks a lot, but one of those guys, when he does speak, the players listen.
Eric, do the Canadiens have a leadership problem?
No, I agree with everything that Stu just said, and it's really just a void created by the injuries. You have one guy really, and everything on top of that from the coaching and management and all that. But I would suggest that a lot of people put the wrong emphasis, when it comes to the whole leadership question. They think about what it is through the media or this or that. If you really want a proper sample of what the leadership is like on the Canadiens, take a look at the culture that's taken shape within the team, right? Like, this team, which shouldn't be able to beat anybody, has won 3 of its last 5 games and lost to 2 exceptionally good teams and competed. I was in Toronto for that game, down 5-1. The Canadiens kept pushing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's not like they just gave up and said, okay, this game's done, let's go to the next one.
Yeah.
And that hasn't really happened. I could think of 2 games all season where their effort was substandard. And I think you have to credit leadership for things like that. And Nick Suzuki may not be the rah-rah this or that, but he is the right person to be the captain of this team. And I think that's been proven in a very short sample, and he's only going to grow into the role more. And the real answer to your question, Tony, is with Edmondson absent and Gallagher absent for so much of the season and Monahan on the sidelines and so many veteran guys out, you could always have more. You could always have more than what they currently have.
So I came across this earlier today on Twitter, and supposedly it's Guy Boucher who said that he believes there's a leadership problem. That's what I read. And I say this, let's keep in mind that team that went to the Stanley Cup final did not bring back Eric Stahl. They didn't bring back Corey Perry. Shea Weber has unofficially retired. So has Carey Price. Ben Sherratt was traded. That's a huge leadership void. Now, in terms of the injuries, Michael Matheson's missed 61% of the season. Monahan and Gallagher have missed 55% each. Drouin's missed 41%. Edmondson 30%. And David Savard 23%. When a team is in a rebuilding phase, the general manager is not going to go out to acquire leadership or acquire players that are going to make this team better. So there could be less leadership now than there probably has been in a very, very long time, but it's nobody's fault, right? That's what I'm getting at. It's nobody's fault.
Tony, one of the reasons, or one of the big reasons they gave Nick Suzuki the C as opposed to, let's say, Brendan Gallagher, is because I think they wanted some stability in the captaincy moving forward, and they wanted somebody who was going to be here through this rebuild from beginning to when they hopefully become a much better team 3 years down the road or however long it's going to take. And Nick Suzuki is that guy. He's the guy.
They wanted a bridge to the youth also, right? Like,
yeah, that's right. They wanted
closer in age to a lot of the younger guys that are going to be there, right? So.
Exactly. And that's one of the reasons he got to see. And again, that's one of the reasons why Gallagher was made an assistant and Edmondson was made an assistant, to have some veterans around him to help him out. And just, they've had so many injuries to so many key veteran players that Suzuki has been sort of left alone in a leadership role. And again, that doesn't mean he hasn't, and the leadership role in this team right now, the main leader of this team is Marty St. Louis. I mean, Eric's talking about how this team doesn't give up, how they keep fighting, how they keep going, beating Edmonton. Like, they had no business. That team had no business being on the ice against the Edmonton Oilers, and they beat them. But this team hasn't given up, and they're still buying what Marty St. Louis is selling. So the main leader on this team right now is Marty St. Louis.
And on the player side, I would give a little bit of credit to Josh Anderson too. Here's a guy who's always accountable, who always stands up and says what needs to be said when it needs to be said. And he, I know people want to see him go balls to the wall every single game, but the reality of being a player of his style doesn't enable you to do that over 82 games. He's trying out there.
You'll break down.
Whether he has the physical wherewithal to be able to do it every single night,
I
think it's fair to criticize him on that end. But, this is a guy, if you get to know Josh Anderson pretty well, I'm sure Stu would attest to it, he's a stand-up guy and a leader.
A shout-out to
that goes back to last season, Eric, too, when, after Dominic Ducharme, what turned out to be his last game, it was Josh Anderson who said, it's no fun coming to the rink anymore.
Yeah.
And that, to me, that was the final, that was, I think when Jeff
nail in the coffin.
When Jeff Gordon heard that, he went, "Okay, we got to do something now."
It was the nail in the coffin. Yeah, I think you're right. Shutout, I was saying, to Playground, over 600 machines, poker tournaments, playground, casino games, daily promotions, and unmatched customer service. Why go anywhere else? Located just over the Mercier Bridge, only minutes from downtown Montreal. And once again, we will get to Eric's article, and that's why I'm happy, really happy that Eric's on. I can't wait to get Stu's opinion on what's been going on too with that work in the last year that Jeff Gordon and the management team have been able to do. But before that, guys, no Doc, no Weidman. Last year, the Canadiens lost 731 games, man games lost. I don't have the exact number this year. I believe it's in the 500s, and I believe it's like the worst in the league again. It was the worst last year, and if it's not the worst this year, I'm sure it's in the bottom three, guys. This doesn't, whether it is the team of the strength and conditioning or the sports therapists or the medical team, whether it is or it isn't on them, it's a number they would rather not see, right? It just doesn't look good on anybody, correct? They're unfortunate all we want.
Strength and conditioning, I don't think factors into it. We're not talking about 10 guys out with groin injuries here.
Okay,
that's a good point. And I would even go as far to say that I don't even think there's a single one of them that has that type of injury. Mike Matheson had an abdominal strain and missed 61% of the season, as you put it, and a reoccurring injury that happened. And when that happens, it's hard to get out of that pattern.
Mm-hmm.
But strength, the guys that they hired in strength and conditioning are phenomenal. Like, Dale is an unbelievable trainer. Medical staff, I think there's a lot of questions, less to do with the amount of injuries and more to do with the management of the injuries. And I've taken my shots already. I wrote an article about how Cole Caulfield was allowed to play in a season that doesn't matter, with having popped his shoulder out and popped it back in himself and gone through all the evaluations, and whether they knew all the information or not before finally making their decision. They knew for a week and a half where he played 5 extra games and practiced 4 times and ended up with season-ending surgery. And that to me is questionable. I can't say whether or not, because I'm not behind the scenes, as to whether or not the whole thing needs to be revamped and looked at, but there's no question it needs to be reevaluated. Like, it needs to be heavily evaluated, which Kent Hughes said, that happens every year and will happen again this year. I think they're definitely going to look at the procedures and the people that they have in place and whether or not they need to add in those departments or change in those departments. Strength and conditioning, I'm sorry, like, I can't really put it on those guys. We're not, like I said, we're not talking about a bunch of guys with groin injuries here.
No, with the injuries, I think the main concern, Tony, for the Canadian standpoint should be guys coming back too soon or guys coming back when they weren't ready. I think of Sean Monahan, like, I remember being at the game in Calgary. He walked past the media room in a cast, played the game, and then when he did the interviews in the room after the game, he had the walking boot back on. He said it was an injury result of getting hit with a puck, so you figure he broke a bone in his foot. So why was he allowed to play so long? And it reminds me of when Shea Weber played through his broken foot. I think he played 25 games on a broken foot before he was shut down, which led to so many other injury issues.
Brian Jonta too, by the way. Remember Brian?
And now, now we're seeing they're very secretive now about what's going on with Monahan. Like, I'm wondering, like, has compensating for his foot screwed up his hips again? We don't know what's going on there. Practice in Nashville just before Christmas. Or just after Christmas, I can't remember which, but anyway, remember Brendan Gallagher at practice, he went down really hard in the corner. He was down on the ice for a good 4 or 5 minutes. Graham Reinbank came out to take him back. He went back to the bench. He sat on the bench for maybe 5 minutes, and he went back and he finished practice. And I was standing beside Danny Dubé watching practice. I said to Danny Dubé, how many games until he's going to be out again? And when Gallagher was back on the ice in practice, people who don't get to see the Canadiens practice, Brendan Gallagher practices the same way he plays. He doesn't know how to do anything except go 100%, even when it's in practice. And sure enough, 2 or 3 games later, he was out again. So you got to wonder.
You go before that too, because he came back, played in Washington, and got hurt. In the game, he went heavily into the boards and came up limping. Then at practice once again, and he was wearing a brace on the road for a long time until all of a sudden it's a walking boot walking by us on a daily basis. And Gallagher is an exception to the rule because, you literally have to tie him to a chair to get him to not play a hockey game.
But sometimes medical staff has to do that, right, Eric? I mean, that's part of you have to tie him to a chair if you have to. And with Monahan, okay, I understand you really want.
Well, especially this season where none of this stuff matters. Like
Monahan really wanted to play that game in Calgary for obvious reasons, right?
Yeah.
So he played that game in Calgary, but I think he played another couple of games after that before he was shut down. Like, why? Maybe he begged them, I really want to play in Calgary. And especially with, they might have just lost the first-round draft pick for next year because of the way they handled this. I mean, if Monahan continued to play and played the way he had, you figure he was probably might have been worth the first-round draft pick at the trade deadline. So. Now I can't see them getting anything because he's not going to play the next couple of games. There's only maybe, 3 more games left before the trade deadline. What's the team going to give up for a guy who's coming off 2 hip surgeries? Now he's had this foot issue. We don't know what's the issue right now. When Kent Hughes met with us at the midseason point, he said that Monahan was very close to returning. Something obviously happened.
Not happening.
No, it's not happening.
It's not happening, and now we're 5 games from the deadline. He's not even on the trip. So knock off 2. The chances that he gets on the ice, no. I mean, he's not playing Saturday, so that's 3 because he won't practice with the team. It's, you know what? Put all that aside because the Canadiens already got a first-round pick to take the guy. I feel terrible for him. I feel so bad for Sean Monahan, and they were successful in convincing him to stop. It just took too long, and I would say the same thing about Caulfield. They convinced him to stop and get surgery. It took too long, with a player who is so vital to your future. And I think, I don't know, the Canadiens weren't happy about me with me when I wrote about it. And that's fine. They have the right to be upset when they get called out for things, but at the same time, I'm sorry, he's too important to the future in a season.
Well, they could be upset all they want, Eric. I mean, you're absolutely justified in writing it, and everyone watching it was thinking the same thing. What in the world is going on here? It's a lost season. You have a guy who's going to be a 40, 45, 50 goal scorer going forward for the next 7, 8 years, who's, you want to keep here for the longest time. Once again, it's a lost season. What are you doing putting him out there? So I think it's justified. And guys, I think in Monahan's case, he's got a label of damaged goods, very unfortunately for him. Mm-hmm. I think we have to maybe welcome the idea that the Canadiens probably signed him to a 1-year deal, and they hope.
I don't even think we could talk about that right now. Like right now, it's can this guy come back healthy and play hockey? Because unless he does, there's no 1-year deal with the Canadiens. There's no 1-year deal with anybody, and that's knowing how well he played. And you talk about damaged goods and the reputation of damaged goods. You've got a couple players. This is the worst news for Kent Hughes. Is that You've got a few players here in Montreal who, even if they're playing well, have the reputation of being damaged goods. And I'm not talking about physically. Who will objectively watch Jonathan Drouin's play and admit that he's playing well, and that could overcome, whatever his reputation is around the league, that, for whatever reason he bails at times, or some people might have the perception that he's soft. Like objectively, Stu and I and yourself, Tony, we've watched all of his games this year, and to be honest, for the last 2 months, whenever he's been healthy, he's playing great hockey.
Very good.
Is that going to overwhelm what the perception is of this player out there? And at $5.5 million cut in half, if you have a team that is searching, okay, like who's one guy we could add that could really help? He's really far down the list because of that rep, and it's Mike Hoffman. Like Kent Hughes is trying very hard to trade Mike Hoffman. It's not a secret at this point. Like he's going to try everything he can to move that player. Is he going to be able to do it with 1 year left at $4.5 million? I honestly, the whole city should congratulate him if he gets it done. Like
And then Joel Edmondson. I mean, Joel Edmondson skated by himself after practice today, very gingerly, to use Danny Gallivan's old line. Like he's damn. I mean, that back just keeps going out on him, right? They haven't said it's his back. At first, they said it was a lower body injury. Then they said it was an upper body injury. So you got to figure it's a middle body injury, which is the back, right? So, there's another guy they thought they might get something for. I mean, Kent Hughes might not be able to do anything at the trade deadline.
I think he'll be able to move Evgeny Dadonov, but again, he's another one of those guys who's low down the list.
Yeah,
he is a guy that some people might. Hey, if it's anything, great. If it's anything, it's great because they were able to move Shea Weber's deal, which would have put them in a really tough spot from a long-term IR perspective. But you think about one of the major things that Kent Hughes would like to be able to do, knowing that Hoffman will be really extremely almost impossible to move, that Drouin is unlikely, that Dadonov might move for a really slim return, that Monahan and Edmondson are probably staying put. What he'd like to be able to do is become a third-party broker for some teams out there that are trying to alleviate themselves the cap situation, and even that will be challenging if Brendan Gallagher is coming back and Caden Gooley's coming back, and so like he's in a spot where I think the fans are more informed than ever before because we've had nothing much, like you mentioned off the top, we haven't had that much more to talk about other than these things over the last couple of weeks. They'll understand if he comes out pretty empty after trade deadline, but it's not where he hoped he'd be. The good news for you, Tony, since you've been asking for it to happen all year, is they're going to lose a lot of games from here to the end of the season because look at their schedule. It is tough as hell.
I hear you. So Edmondson and Monahan can't get on a matrixhomefitness.ca treadmill right now, but some of the others definitely can. You can bring it home and discover a club quality workout in the comfort of your own home. Visit matrixhomefitness.ca. Eric, it was about a year ago that you touched base with Jeff Gordon, VP of Executive Vice President of Hockey Ops for the Montreal Canadiens, and he basically told you that when he was hired, he found that the Canadiens were behind in many departments. They didn't have a skills coach. They didn't have a skills team. In terms of analytics, they outsourced. They didn't have their own in-house that was full-time with them. He thought it was mind-boggling that on the road, the players were using DoorDash and Uber Eats and all that stuff. So there was a lot of work to be done. About a year later, you checked back with Jeff Gordon. For those who didn't read your article, and I urge them to do so, Sportsnet and sportsnet.ca, what did you come up with?
Look, I knew the minute that I wrote that article a year ago that there would have to be a follow-up on it this year, right? Like how far have they come within that year and all these different departments that they needed to address? And I think the pandemic was a very viable excuse for some of the things we saw. So we talk about Uber Eats, DoorDash on the road, or bag lunches at the at the practice facility. They were under severe restrictions. They were the only team that was essentially bubbled when they traveled to the United States. Those were factors, but still, you have a hard time kind of understanding it when you're talking about the New York Yankees of hockey, as Kent Hughes referred to them in deciding to take the job. That was some stuff that certainly turned a lot of heads when I wrote it a year ago. And part of that article is the main focus of that article was to say Jeff Gordon wasn't just brought here to rebuild the Montreal Canadiens team. He was brought here to rebuild the organization, coming from his background with the New York Rangers and Boston Bruins, two first-class organizations, much like the Canadiens had a reputation of being for a very long time. I know a lot of people throw dirt on Marc Bergevin over this. Marc Bergevin was a really sharp hockey guy, but he wasn't that type of organizational type culture and organization and bureaucracy and doing things in a modern way. He very much had a very limited circle of trust. It was very small, and by the end of it, it was a party of one practically. There wasn't a lot of. It was a party of two, maybe with Scott Mellenby, but there wasn't a lot of people that he was so open with to be able to create the kind of collaborative environment that Jeff Gordon knew and Kent Hughes knew that they would need to build here. So the main takeaway from the follow-up piece, which came out today, is the Canadiens listened to their players. They didn't just think about what trades they were going to make to rebuild the team on the ice. They listened to the players on the feedback of what would make their lives easier in Montreal. They hired private chefs. They expanded a lounge area where players hang around more often. They invested in development and analytics, and now, like we see every day at practice, there's 6 coaches on the ice. That's a lot of individual attention that each player gets, and you see it now.
That's fantastic, by the way.
There's a lot more players that stick around longer. It's annoying for us because we're sitting there waiting for them, but they stick around a lot longer on the ice, practicing after even a 90-minute, 75-minute session. The main takeaway from me, the thing that I think Canadiens fans should be most encouraged about, is Jeff Gordon and Kent Hughes took their time with the people that they were going to hire to expand in those different areas. And they, when he said to me a year ago, we don't even have a skills coach, which is standard across the NHL, they could have hired a guy to work on slap shots and one-timers and skating and this and that, and Adam Nicholas certainly has those credentials. They hired a guy who's way ahead of the curve from a development standpoint, that actually thinks like Marty St. Louis in terms of simulating game environment, and everything he does is with an actual purpose. A guy that can actually build out development plans for each and every one of his players in the organization and focuses on what are the strengths. Everybody thinks development is let's work on the weaknesses. He focuses on what the strength is of the player and then picks 3 specific kind of categories that player can focus on in order to get to those strengths more often. And yes, they work on deficiencies also, but his team was expanded. He's been empowered.
Reinforcing and mastering your strengths as well.
And analytics, they could have hired anybody. They hired Chris Boucher, a guy who's an absolute pioneer in the industry. So again, if you're the New York Yankees of hockey and you're going to live up to that reputation, you can't just hire anybody just to check a box.
Boucher was with San Jose before the Canadiens, correct?
Yeah, for 2 years. So what you should be looking to do is be a leader in the space, people that look at this team and say, whoa, look what those guys are doing in development. Look what they're doing with analytics, and look at how they're bringing it all together. And so, look, it's a very positive spun article for the Canadiens, no question about it. But at the same time, they deserve the credit for operating the way they did. And I think we had a pretty strong sense in getting to know Jeff Gordon a little bit and getting to know Kent Hughes a little bit and getting to know Marty St. Louis a little bit. They were guys that could be trusted to do the job the right way. And my reporting, that was about 4 months of reporting and talking to just about everybody in the organization to make sure I had the facts, shows that they've made a lot of really good decisions that creates the structure by which they can actually not only rebuild this team, but rebuild the organization and move forward in a very healthy way and get their goals accomplished. Whether or not they win, so many things have to go right. Like Marty St. Louis always says, winning isn't loyal. You could do everything right, but it doesn't necessarily happen for you.
Yeah.
But at least they're doing things the right way.
Well, as Eric said earlier, I mean, him and I compete against each other in a way, but we appreciate each other's work. And Eric did a fantastic job on this story for people who haven't read it yet. One of the things that really jumped out at me, Eric, is he said they had no skills coach, which, Gordon seemed to be shocked by that, right? He was like, that's like so many years ago that all these teams already had skills coaches, and the Canadiens didn't even have one yet.
He was so diplomatic a year ago when we spoke too. Like, Tony, what you said, like the way he actually said it himself is, when I said, you guys are way behind, he said, like, the organization has a bit of an old school feel to it. That's what he said.
Well,
he didn't want to throw Mark Bergevin under the bus.
No, but the thing
with these guys, he was thankful to have Caden Gooley and the guys that, there was a lot of good work done from a hockey perspective, but a lot
the thing with Gordon and Hughes and St. Louis is that they're confident and they're secure guys. And I think there was a lot of insecurity with Mark Bergevin. I think that was one of his downfalls as a GM, and they work well together. And you can tell there was a lot of thought process went into everything that Jeff Gordon's done since he took over. And the other thing I found interesting, Eric, was he said, like, the group they have now, he's not in a rush to add to it because they've brought in so many people now. Yeah. He wants these people to get used to working with each other and know each other well before they start bringing in more people. But he has a plan. He's going to bring in more people, but he's smart enough to realize you can't just throw 100 people in a room and say, okay, figure it out. You bring in a few, you find out who's the leaders, who's good, whatever, and then you listen to them about who maybe we should hire next, who we should bring in next. So it's a real thoughtful process that they've gone through. They know they're not in a rush. This is a rebuilding process. It's going to take time to fix the problems from before, but they're on the right, whether it'll work or not. The thing I like about these guys is that they're confident. They have a plan. They're going to stick to their plan. Yeah. And if it works, great. And if it doesn't work, well, then it doesn't work, and they'll bring in other people to do the jobs. If they're confident in what they're doing and they're sticking to their plan and they're going to follow it through.
I have to go outside of this whole thing and just say, beforehand, I had some real questions about Jeff Molson's leadership. I had some real questions. And I remember, the day that he hired Jeff Gordon, all of us said to himself, he did something genius here and circumvented the whole French thing, because he'll hire a French GM and the GM will be the puppet of this guy. And we all made our assumptions. I remember Jeff that day said, you guys may not fully understand this now, but you will when this comes together. He put a lot of thought into this. And I think in doing it, in hiring both Gordon and Hughes and having this kind of two-headed monster and speaking quite earnestly about the fact that it is a two-man job now. Like there's just too much that goes into it for the exact reasons that I wrote in my piece, right? Like you're not just rebuilding a hockey team. You are rebuilding an organization and bringing them into the 21st century. I think Jeff Molson had a vision and followed through on that vision, and doing so really took his biggest steps as the leader and CEO of the Montreal Canadiens in his time that he's been involved with the team. I think this is a big evolution for him. And,
you're right, Eric. A lot of people didn't think he had it in him to make that kind of move, because a lot of people saw it as going around the whole language issue, right? And finding a way to take a little bit of a detour around it. And it's worked out to be a great decision, because he was right. Montreal is a different market, and the way Jeff Gordon and Kent Hughes work together is absolutely awesome. We're wrapping up here, guys.
I also wonder, Tony, for 1 second, I also wonder how much France Margaret Belanger is not a hockey person. She's the president of Group CH, but she's a very smart woman, and I wonder how much advice or how much Jeff Molson is taking or maybe learning from her from a business standpoint also, as far as some of these changes that are going on with the Canadiens.
Interesting points, Stu. The Matheson family is very happy.
Yeah, they are. Well, it's funny is, Eric had spoke with Mike after the game last Tuesday for the quote that was at the bottom of my column about he remembers what it was like being a little boy sitting up at the seats at the Bell Center watching a game. And after I read the quotes, I decided to get a hold of Mike's dad, Rod, to get his sort of take on his memories of what that was like. And I think anybody who has a son and brings them to a Canadiens game when they're little, and if the kid's playing hockey, in the back of your mind, there's probably that little thought, boy, it would be so cool if my kid ever played in the NHL one day, never mind playing for the Canadiens. And for the Matheson family, you're saying, are they happy? Not only is their son playing in the NHL, he's playing for the Canadiens, and the general manager is a guy who was his agent from the time he was like 14 or 15 years old.
That's awesome,
It's right. Like it's surreal. That was the word he used. Like, it's just to think for all these things to come together that way. And Matheson, his dad told me, he said the first time he realized, I said, when did you realize that Mike might be good enough to play in the NHL one day? And he said it was at a Bantam tournament in Eastern Townships, and Phil LeCavalier, who worked for Kent or with Kent as an agent, came up to him and said, I want to talk to you about your son. And he was like, what? And that was the day he went. And he said, since then, everything just went so quick. And now he's the kid from Point Claire playing for the Canadiens.
Yeah,
It's a great story.
It's funny because when Michael was about 14 or 15, and I was working, I had my radio show at the time. Well, we had a day at John Rennie High School, which was a day where they had an open house, and they were, we were talking to some of their athletes and some of their students in the Sport Etude program. So we're publicizing the Sport Etude program that day, and the one athlete I interviewed was Michael Matheson, who was in the Sport Etude program at John Rennie, and he was probably 15 years old. And I thought I was talking to like a 35-year-old professor. Yeah. And I went home and I'm like, I hadn't even seen this kid play hockey, and it didn't matter. Like, I knew he was going to make it. I mean, I was talking to a guy who at age 15 conducted himself like a pro. And I said to myself, oh my God, man, God, please let my kids talk like this when they're 15. And, they're 18 and they're 20. And they still
not much has changed.
But
as Eric was saying,
such a good dude.
Is one of the nicest guys you will ever meet in sports.
Yeah.
Such a good dude. And I honestly see so many similarities to the guy he was traded for. Like, when Petrie came here, he took off. I hope it doesn't end the same way for Matheson in Montreal, because that, I wouldn't wish that upon anybody who has to play in this market. That was a really tough year that Jeff Petrie went through here. But man, you think about how defensemen mature at a later age and come into their own. And honestly, what we're seeing from Mike Matheson of late, now that he's finally healthy and bringing it, he could be a part of the future of this team. He's here for a couple more years under contract, but
yeah,
he can really be. These might be, the Canadiens might have his best years right now, given the way he's playing.
Yeah, Matheson's wife's very happy to be here too. She's from Buffalo, and her parent, the grandparents of their young son are on the West Island, so they've got a pretty nice setup here.
I'll take it a step further. When his career is over, if he wants to, remain in Montreal and live here, he can work for the Montreal Canadiens, because he's bright. He knows the game. He knows how to manage people. He knows how to treat people. He gets it, period.
The other thing that was interesting, the quote that he gave Eric, was he said he wanted to say to the fans when he was the first star after the game against the Islanders that, I was one of you. And he wasn't confident enough in his French, and his French is outstanding. I mean, his parents sent him to not French immersion school, but the French elementary school. And he hasn't lost any. I mean, his French is really, really good, but I guess he's still not as confident maybe in his vocabulary or whatever.
Don't worry about it, Mikey. If Eric Engels can work sports radio and Tony Marinaro can work sports radio in French, you can too. Hey, in ending, guys, in 30 seconds, I saw this on Twitter. Let's bring it up. How about this for a goal song for the Montreal Canadiens? Did you see it? That is the entrance song for Montreal's own Sami Zayn, who there you see him wearing the T-shirt, honorary Hab. And can we take a look at the tweet? And Yellow, if we bring up the tweet, I think it's NHL on Reddit. That had it. Hey, let me just, I want to give them credit where credit is due. Let me just see here. Habs on Reddit. Pardon me. Habs on Reddit. Okay. What do you think? I love it.
Why not?
Hey,
anything's better than the Leafs goal song.
Stu? You like
I'm
it?
a country music fan. I like when they play "Take Me Home, Country Road" at the Bell Center. Everybody sings along. That would be my choice.
That's why you love Nashville so much. You're a country
You
music
don't
guy.
have to like country music to like Nashville. Trust me.
I hear you. You know what? I've never been, but I know that the what is it? The NHL draft's there this summer, right?
It is.
Yeah.
I think you should bring the Sick podcast down to Nashville for the NHL
you know
draft.
what?
Nashville is an awesome place.
You better practice. You better practice your beer drinking though, Tony.
I'm going to practice right now. All right. Listen, thanks, guys. This was really enjoyable. At one point on YouTube Live alone, we had over 500 people, so I know it wasn't only enjoyable for me. It was enjoyable for everyone. Thanks, guys.
All right,
Cheers.
Tony. See you, Eric.
All right, there you have it. Stu Cowan and Eric Engels, and they went overtime, guys. I really appreciate it, all right? I really, really appreciate it. I mean, Stu was there from the beginning, so he went over like an hour and 10 minutes or whatever it was. And I appreciate all of you watching. So if you liked what you just saw, hit the like button, message SICK, S-I-C-K. If you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, comment SICK and hit the like button. If you're going to be watching or listening, pardon me, on Google, Apple, or Spotify, leave us a 5-star review. I got a review earlier today. It wasn't good. It really, really wasn't good. Somebody said that I was talking about my hair or my looks, and then they, hold on a second, started with nothing. And when Tony Marinaro started, don't know where that came from, started talking about his body hair, I tuned somewhere else. Bye-bye. And that one there kind of broke my heart because it seems to me, I think we got a pretty good podcast. And if you would agree, I want you to message SICK right now on YouTube Live, on Facebook Live, and on Twitter Live. Can I see about 106? SICK, 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 SICK. They're coming in. They're coming in. Okay, it's working. Thank you. Now, I can go to bed. I feel so much better now. Thanks, everyone, for watching. You are all the best. You are a SICK community. You are SICK fans. You are a SICK army, and I can't do it without you. Tell your friends about it. Felicità. Senti nell'aria c'è già la nostra canzone d'amore che va. This is a good ending to the show. Tell your friends about it. Hey, who is that guy? They're going to ask you. That guy. That guy. Who are you? Who am I? I'm Marinaro.
And that's a wrap. Hope you don't miss us too much until next time. Follow the Sick Podcast with Tony Marinaro on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Google Play, and Apple Podcasts. The Sick Podcast is brought to you by Energy Transportation Group, driven to be different. La Vida Tibi, embrace your true nature. And La Cage. If the last time you went to La Cage was when the Habs won the cup, it's time you went back to La Cage. The menu will surprise you.